From AgriPoint, I'm James Kotecki, and this is the Point Cloud. My guest today is Breece Robertson, an expert on saving the planet with geospatial technology. Her work spans organizations, governments, companies, and communities. She's the author of the book, Protecting the Places We Love, Conservation Strategies for Entrusted Lands and Parks. Breece Robertson, welcome to the Point Cloud.
Hey, thank you so much, James. I'm so glad to be here.
Glad we could finally make this one happen. You have a really interesting and maybe kind of multifaceted career. At least that's how it appears to me. So how do you introduce yourself to someone maybe that you're just meeting for the first time? How do you describe who you are?
Yeah, well, I always start with saying that I work in the conservation field. And then usually people say, conservation, what do you do? What does that mean? And so then my next point is, well, I basically create maps and different technology products that help us understand what needs to be protected so that we can figure out how to do that.
Obviously, this is a nature tech and ag tech show, so we understand that there's a lot of technology behind this. But someone may be approaching this for the first time. These worlds can maybe kind of feel kind of different. The crunchy outdoor world of just sitting around in the trees versus like the world of computers and software and digital technology. How did you combine those two things together for you?
Yeah, for me, well, it all really started when I went to a planning meeting here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. This was back in 2001. And working with this really diverse group of stakeholders, people from the city, from the county, from the Forest Service, from the pueblos here in Santa Fe County. And everybody was trying to come together to figure out how do they want to see Santa Fe grow and what areas do they want to see protected and not touched in that growth. And there's really nothing like laying a map down on the table to get everybody on the same page with what you're talking about. And so that was really my first introduction into using maps, digitally created maps, to get everybody on the same table towards a common goal. So I was hooked after that.
Can you dive one layer deeper into the feeling of the before and after of having a map? Is it the sense that like without a map, everyone is kind of having their own discussion about what's going on, but they don't understand if they're even kind of speaking about the same things that the other people in the group are actually talking about?
That's it exactly. Everybody has their own perception, their own visual in their head. And by bringing this data and information together and sharing it, it really engages people. They come around the table where the map is laid out. They start pointing to things and here's where I live and here's what you're talking about over here. And so I think it just gets everybody on the same page.
It kind of reminds me of that concept of the overview effect when astronauts see the Earth from space for the first time. They get a new perspective. And it occurs to me that's literally what a map is, right? It's giving that to everybody.
Yeah, a perspective, an orientation. Yeah.
Was that map in that meeting that inspired you? Was that, I assume, a paper map at that time?
At that time, yes, it was a paper map.
Tell us how technology fits in for you.
Yeah, even though that was a paper map, 20 years ago, we were using geospatial technology, digital technology to create those maps. But we were still relying on printing those maps out and not sharing them through the digital metaverse, if you will. And so, over my career, I've really seen the advances of technology to be able to, number one, access data from different sources more easily, combine all that data into a technology-based application that then you could share. And so, that's really been a huge, I think, accomplishment. And we're still seeing things grow exponentially in the technology world.
And what's the scope or the universe that you use to define what geospatial technology is and means right now?
I would say it's a very wide scope now, that as we're starting to see more and more startups in the space, using technology in really unique ways. It's much broader than what you used to just think about in map making software. It's like AgriPoint's technology. It's using technology through an application on a phone to scan an area and gather detailed 3D point clouds, creating these digital twins, and then using AI and machine learning to tell us so much more about what you're looking at.
I suppose geospatial technology originally was talking about satellites. Is that fair to say? Was that the original kind of origin of what that term meant?
Probably. That's a good question. I think even now, when you say you work in the geospatial technology realm, everybody says, oh, you do GPS work. Mm-hmm. But, I think it's so much more now, so much more encompassing.
When Apple came out with its new VR headset and was talking about this concept of spatial computing, I'm not sure if Apple coined that phrase or just really started to maybe popularize it, or people started thinking about it more because of what Apple had done. Did you look at that conversation and say, I've been doing this for years, right? This idea of having computation to think about physical space is old hat for you.
Absolutely. And, the original ArcGIS software, which is what I've mainly used, it's the Esri's product that's they're the global leader in creating geospatial software. They've been around for over 50 years now. And so, I would say when I started my career 25 years ago, I was already doing spatial computing and analytics. But, I think like with the Apple example, it's just taking it to the next level, using these VR headsets and other technologies.
And are you usually called upon by the folks that you work for and with to be the actual person who is literally on the computer using these technologies to make the map? Are you more of a consultant and a strategist to others to think about strategically how they get the data for that and how they create the map? What's your role in the process?
Yeah, well, I started out as the lone girl in the back room creating the maps. And, pretty quickly within the Trust for Public Land became more of that strategist and advisor. And that's really the role I play now. I have the ability to really see the forest for the trees, no pun intended.
You are very much allowed to use that pun, by the way. If anyone can use that pun, it's you.
Yes. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, really being able to see across whether it's an organization and understanding what their challenges are and bringing data together and using that data in a strategic way. Like at the Trust for Public Land, it was, how do we make sure everybody has access to a park or open space within a 10-minute walk? And of course, you have to have the maps and the data to be able to analyze who has access and who doesn't. Mm-hmm. And so that really started this whole roadmap forward towards developing a 10-minute walk to a park campaign that became a national campaign that mayors and cities signed on to. And so, a lot of times big initiatives start with the map.
I think that's true of like explorers from hundreds of years ago. And it's probably true of whatever we do on Mars in the next several centuries. And it's true today.
Absolutely.
I want to talk a lot about the technology, obviously, but talking about mayors and communities and, these are in some ways political issues. There's certainly policy issues. There's socioeconomic situations behind maps. Maps can tell certain stories. They can conceal certain stories in certain situations, depending on who's using them and the kind of stories that those people want to tell. And I'm not exactly sure how to get into this or how much of a tangent this would take us on, but I am just curious how much of your work kind of brushes up against some of those narrative disparities or those political issues of like, if you present a map showing something, and if it's crystal clear what it's showing, then that could have certain political ramifications maybe that some people might not want.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad you bring this up because there are a lot of biases in not only our maps, but in the data behind the maps. And so, especially as AI is becoming more prolific, we have to really think hard as cartographers, as geospatial technology experts, what data we're using, what are the inputs, what are the outputs, and then also make sure we're being as inclusive as possible, bringing as many people to the table, sharing our products as we're creating them, getting as much feedback as possible. So we make sure that we're not having unintended consequences by these products that we create.
Have you personally ever been in the midst of a really controversial situation because of a map project that you were working on?
Yes. With the Trust for Public Land, we created these conservation maps called green prints. And we intentionally, it was usually a year to a year-long process where we would bring all these stakeholders together from the community. And actually, even had processes where we'd go out to the local park on Saturday mornings or the baseball game, on Friday nights and set up tables to inform people about what we were doing and get feedback. But many times, people didn't participate, they didn't show up to the meetings, or we just weren't able to reach them and didn't even know who these people were, at the time. And so, we had many green print processes where at the end of the project, you're a year and a half through the project, you've got the map of all the places that the community said they wanted to protect. And somebody comes out of the woodwork and says, this is wrong. I wasn't included, so it's not that you really have to go back to the drawing board, but, you do want to, when you're creating these community driven maps, make sure everybody is included. And so, yes, I've been involved in many of those situations.
I'd like to talk about how this work that you're doing relates and intersects with a lot of these complex conservation issues that you're doing the work for. Maybe a good way of starting this conversation is, what kind of things can maps help us do as far as, to use the title of your book, protecting the places we love? How does geospatial technology and the mapping work that you do play into that?
Many different ways. So, maps can be very helpful at supporting decisions. So, strategic decision support. So in the example of green prints, it's all about what needs to be protected and why. You mentioned policy and advocacy. Maps are critical. Data are critical for helping to drive policy and advocacy, showing legislators, showing city councilors, showing, these policymakers and decision makers what these issues are. Is there a disparity in access to open space? Are there people who are experiencing environmental justice issues like pollution because of, systemic issues in our society? So maps are really important for that, but also the storytelling piece is so important. It's great to have data. It's great to have maps, but then a lot of times you do have to translate a lot of this data and information in a way that tells a story and brings in the people or brings in nature, depending on what the issue is that you're trying to solve.
How good is our geospatial technology, our mapping technology today? And what's kind of just out of your reach with your technology abilities, but something that we might soon achieve?
Yeah, I think as far as your question about where is the geospatial technology today, it has come a very long way, in the last, let's say, 2 decades, where it used to cost $300,000, $500,000 to create a simple app on the phone that we take, for granted today. Now it's out of the box. Literally, you could probably create a interactive web map within 30 minutes. We're just kind of starting to push the boundaries. I would say AI and machine learning, those are huge areas where we've seen really rapid advances over the last even year, even 6 months. And I think we're going to continue to see more and more advances there as the computing infrastructure gets better, as the algorithms, AI algorithms get smarter, as our access to high resolution satellite imagery and on the ground capture technology and data gets better and better. So I think there's really this, there's been a big gap in the middle between satellites and what we can gather on the ground. And we're starting to see that gap close so that we have a much better understanding of what's happening just holistically.
And tell me about the ways that you're thinking about AI here. Is it someone like you would previously do a task and now that task is becoming automated? Or is AI, and maybe the answer is both, of course, or is AI more of a helper that's doing maybe different tasks or opening up new possibilities for analysis? What are the gaps that AI specifically is filling in?
Yeah, it's definitely both. I just saw an announcement that Meta and WRI, World Resources Institute, just published a 1 meter tree canopy height data set for the world. So this is huge because you can actually see individual trees with this information that they've created.
And 1 meter here means it's 1 square meter, like every square meter of Earth is being analyzed?
Yes. So whereas, the last time this was done for the globe or calculated for the globe, it was, I believe, at 10 meters. Before that, It was 30 meters. So going from 30 to 10 to 1 meter, that's really huge. And that's AI and machine learning.
You sit on the National Park System Advisory Board. Tell me about how national parks are thinking about applying technology in creative ways here.
Yeah, it's really interesting. National parks, there are a lot of research partnerships between universities and national parks where researchers are looking at things like the acoustics in a park. So when you're standing there, what do you hear? And of course, we've all probably seen in the news, some of our national parks are just being loved to death and so much traffic going through, Yellowstone, some of these other parks. And not only is it affecting people's experience within the park, it's affecting wildlife and nature in those parks too. So there's a lot of research going on right now to actually use these in-field monitors, acoustic monitors, to hear what these sounds are doing, and then matching that up with anonymized cell phone data that can show traffic flows and traffic counts. So National Park Service and our national parks all across the country are really starting to delve into technology to help them address some of these really big issues around tourism and people's experiences there.
So if I hear fewer wolves howling in a certain park, and I can also track that with increased cell phone, pings in that section of the park, I might get a clue that maybe there's too many people there, and or at least that the number of people there are kind of changing the ecosystem.
Yeah, these are things that is there a cause and effect? I would say yes, but the researchers are really working to prove that out.
Yeah. We're talking about a lot of interesting and innovative ways to use technology, but have you seen ways that attempts to use technology to understand the planet and the ecosystem go wrong, either because of the technology or maybe because of the approach? Are there lessons that you've taken from, whiffs that you've seen or experienced in your career?
This is an interesting question. And I think that, a lot of technologies can be brand new technologies that people are testing out in certain areas. And, one thing I always say about data and maps is that the answer isn't likely going to be there in the data and the maps. These things just help inform what we're working on. They're just one piece of a puzzle to helping to solve, a big issue. And I feel like, technology isn't necessarily wrong or bad. It's just how it's being used. And sometimes it can be used, in ways that it's probably not meant to be used for. So that's an example of kind of what I've seen out there.
Do you ever come across people who, I kind of alluded to this at the beginning, there's nature and then there's technology, and we're obviously blending these together, and you're talking about that in your career. Do you ever come across the notion of doing all this analysis on the natural world is somehow diminishing the kind of wild beauty essence of it? Has anyone ever brought that to you?
Definitely. Even some friends. I think we as humans, when we think about wild places, we want to hold them in our mind as wild places that people haven't explored into, untouched nature, basically. And I think as humans, we really want to hold on to that notion. And so there is this friction between looking at a forest, for example, from space using satellites, putting acoustic monitors way into the deep forest to hear things. But, all of these things have massive benefits by knowing what species are in those forests, by being able to monitor canopy cover, moisture content, carbon sequestration potential in these places. Given where we're at this time in our world's history with the massive biodiversity loss and climate change issues that we face, having this information, I think, is more helpful than not. And so that's always my response, actually, to the people who question that.
Does climate change loom large over all of the work that you're doing?
It really does. Right now, in this moment in time, climate change and biodiversity loss are two big drivers, as well as environmental justice, which climate change is a driver for a lot of the racial and environmental justice issues that we see across the country. But also, the work that I did at the Trust for Public Land and creating more parks in cities, creating more green infrastructure, creating these close to home access to nature opportunities really helps people who live in cities that don't have a lot of opportunity in many cases to experience nature, to understand what it means to go lay in the grass or climb a tree or see birds, that you wouldn't normally see in the cityscape. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of work happening out there, but also opportunity in our cities to get more people on board with protecting the planet. Then, the fact of the matter is we have overused the majority of our Earth to date, and we're not going, down in population. Our populations are growing all over the world. And so we really need to understand how we can bring back these landscapes that we have overused through regeneration, through restoration. And we also need to figure out where are the most healthy, vibrant places that are still untouched, that need to stay intact. And technology can really help us to pinpoint where those places are, both from a conservation and a restoration perspective, and help us figure out what we need to do to right the wrongs and protect the places that are the healthiest.
Protecting the places we love, you might say.
Protecting the places that we love.
Which is available wherever fine books are sold, I might add. Your LinkedIn profile says, turning data and information into insights and inspiration, which is this great LinkedIn blurb encapsulation of a lot of what we've been talking about today. And you mentioned earlier in this conversation, the data or some of the story might be there in the map, but it's not going to necessarily get you the whole story. And it's certainly not going to necessarily be, it's going to be maybe a part of the puzzle, but it's a part of the puzzle that leads to inspiration. But the inspiration has to come from somewhere. So where does that inspiration, that action, that insight come from? Tell us about that inspiration piece to actually make those moves.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I've always loved exploring and being out in nature. That's where I get my personal inspiration. So, I really think for me, it's about curiosity, because when I go out into nature and I see certain things, like last week, for example, I was in a bosque, a forest along the Chama River in northern New Mexico, and was walking through the bosque, and there were a pair of great horned owls. And it was just so amazing to see those animals as birds, and just to watch them and see how blended they were into the trees, and just to think about those great horned owls. And, did they have a nest nearby? And look at this beautiful habitat that they live in. So I think being out in nature can really spur inspiration and beauty, but also raise questions and also give you a personal feeling around wanting to protect some of those places.
I think it's safe to say that your embrace of technology has not diminished your enjoyment or reverence for nature.
No.
But I wonder how it makes you feel on the optimism, pessimism scale. You've mentioned some of the threats that we face as a planet, as a species, because of the way that humans are using and misusing our relationship with nature. How are you feeling right now?
Well, I currently am feeling like I want a longer vision, a longer timeline, because, we have a lot of goals set for 2030. And the truth of the matter is we're not going to meet a lot of those goals around climate change and biodiversity loss. And we are going to lose a lot of species. And, we are going to put a lot more carbon in the air between now and 2030. And that does make me very sad. It also makes me it gives me even more fire to go out there and figure out how to use data and technology to help solve these issues. So I'm looking at 2035 and 2040 and 2050, because a lot of the things that we haven't started to see move yet are just starting to move, like permitting and regulation, and some of the things that have held us back in the United States and in other countries from moving some of these innovations forward are starting to release. It's like the dam is breaking. We're going to start seeing much more, I think, action in the next 10 years. So I have a lot of hope for that. I think we can turn this around. Is there a miraculous breakthrough technology that if you could just pick one that you would want for your worlds that would make you feel, 10%, 20%, 30% more optimistic? If you talk about the dam breaking in terms of those other things, is there a breakthrough technology that you'd be interested in and magically acquiring if you could? Well, I'll go back to AI and machine learning. And, I have to just bring this up. AI really requires huge computing capabilities. And we know that those capabilities are also contributing greatly to the carbon issue and the climate change. or the climate issue. And so we have to be really careful about the use of those technologies, but they're also the rapid advances in that area, like with AgriPoint and the data you can capture with the AgriPoint app and being able to use machine learning to calculate all these things in a plot of forest that it used to take people going out to do. It took a lot of time. There was a lot of human error in writing down the data and re-entering the data when you're back in the office. And the fact that, you can take a capture of a location, have AI and machine learning calculate hundreds of different types of attributes within that one plot of land or that one area of forest is really amazing. And I think those types of advances in technology are really going to help our conservationists and our land stewards, our indigenous communities on the ground do more with technology that we already have access to.
Well, Brice Robertson, saving the world one map at a time. We really appreciate you being on the Point Cloud today and sharing your thoughts with us.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here. And everybody get out there and do good work to protect the places that you love.
Well, that's our show. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Please rate us, like us, comment, whatever the algorithms are asking for these days. Please feed them well. And please follow us on social media where the conversation continues. I'm James Kotecki from AgriPoint, and this is the Point Cloud.